Hello all, and welcome to another webinar in the series Phenomenal Science Teaching. I am your presenter today. I'm Vic Sampson. I have a PhD in STEM education. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at Argument Driven Inquiry, and I'm also an Associate Professor of STEM Education at the University of Texas at Austin. Just a reminder for those that are joining us that you can earn continuing education unit credits for attending these webinars. You get 0.5 per session, and if you attend all of the sessions in the series, you get 6 credits for them. As we do for most of these webinars, we will do about 20 minutes on the topic, and then we'll give some time for questions. We'll do some wrap-up announcements and things like that for planning for next time. So today, what we want to do is talk a little bit about promoting and supporting productive student talk. And today, we're specifically going to be talking about whole class discussions. Next week, we'll be looking at more in small groups. But let's go ahead and get this kicked off. We've been talking a lot about three-dimensional instruction and the importance of giving kids opportunities to use content, a framework, and practices to figure out a phenomenon. And so far, we've talked a lot about the idea of how disciplinary ideas and recurring themes come into play. But today, what we would really want to do is start thinking about practices, right? And these are the things that kids start using to make sense of new ideas. I really love this quote here. It comes from Helping Students Make Sense of the World Through the Next Generation Science and Engineering Practices. And it talks about the importance of talk. And it basically says that talk is fundamental to all the science practices. If teachers are going to induct students into these practices and support them in participating actively, there are going to have to be opportunities for all students to make their thinking visible and available to others, right? So if we're going to engage kids in practices, right, talk is part of all of those. How do we get them talking more? How do we make sure that they're making their thinking visible and available to others? So that's really kind of the focus of today is what can we do as teachers to create more opportunities for students to talk? And not just talk about anything, but talk about their thinking so it becomes visible and available to others. So what I tried to boil down is really 6 recommendations for you as a teacher that you can use to promote and support productive whole class discussions while kids are engaging in these practices of science. So the very first one is most important recommendation is know where you need to go before you begin, right? So why are kids engaging in this practice? Why are they engaging in this talk? Are they needing to make a product? Are you trying to surface some ideas? Are you trying to get kids to agree on something or reach consensus, right? So it's being very clear about where you're going before you get started, right? I always think if I'm trying to get ideas to surface during a conversation to see what kids are knowing, what are those ideas exactly that I'm looking for? And knowing that before I get started in a whole class discussion, super important. Second major recommendation is once I know where I'm trying to get kids to go, whether they're designing a investigation or they're making sense of something, I've got to figure out the type of talk that will get students there. So what I'm trying to do is make this graphic here to kind of help illustrate the different kinds of talks when kids are engaging in different types of practices to make sense of the world, right? So the first one, you can think of this as kind of investigative talk. This is when kids are finding ways to gather more information, looking for trends, relationships, differences, right? So you can see that on the graphic in the yellow. And when they're engaging in these practices of planning, carrying out investigations, asking questions, analyzing, interpreting, that's investigating talk, right? So you can kind of think of it if they're needing to engage in those practices, that's the kind of talk that they'll be engaged in. Another type of talk that happens in science when engaged in the practice is sense-making, and that's the idea of connecting ideas together, developing a common understanding from a shared experience. That's illustrated in the green on the diagram, and that's when you're engaging in the practice of constructing explanations, developing using models, using mathematics to make sense of what's going on. Third type of talk, I call it critiquing talk, and that's when kids are sharing, supporting, challenging, and refining, right? So it's less about consensus building and more of looking at how we know what we know. And that comes into play during the practices of engaging in argument from evidence or obtaining, evaluating, communicating information. And then finally, what is common across all the practices is something I call problematizing talks. And that's really when people are trying to uncover gaps in their understanding, identifying weaknesses in things they've made or done, trying to make improvements on things, right? So these are kind of these four big aspects. And so you as a teacher have to kind of decide what kind of talk would be most suitable for kids to engage in, depending on the practice and what you're trying to go with that conversation. Third big recommendation is create a need to talk. Another great quote from this book. So if you're encouraging kids to want to encourage kids into a discussion, right, instead of just sharing ideas, you really need to spark multiple positions, perspectives, solution paths, right, that can be taken in multiple ways. So you need to have a need for kids to want to talk about something. That's something you really have to plan out when giving kids opportunities to engage in these different practices. 4, you really want to think about how you use talk goals and talk moves, right? So talk goals are things a teacher's trying to do when they're steering the conversation or leading a discussion or giving kids opportunity to talk. And then the talk moves are the things that you can do or ask as a teacher to get them to go there. So if you look at this graphic on the right, there's really kind of 4 goals when you're leading a discussion, right? You're trying to get kids to share an idea or expand on one. That's goal 1. Another goal might be getting students to support an idea. So they said something, well, why do you think that? Encourage kids to think with others is the 3rd goal. And then the 4th one is back to that problematizing kind of thing of encouraging students to think about what they know and what they don't know yet. Now, to get that goal to happen as a teacher, you can use what we call a talk move, and that's just a kind of question you can ask kids to get them moving, right? So if I want kids to share an idea, I can ask something like, what do you see going on here? Or what do you think is happening? Or how might we explain that, right? If they give me an idea and I need them to have some support, like why would they think that one way or another, and I want to surface that idea, I can ask a question for the talk move for press for support, something like, why do you think that? What's your evidence for that? What do you make you say that? So these are just all examples of moves that you can make. Notice that they're all questions, and the idea is not here is to tell kids exactly what to do, but to press and move the discussion in meaningful ways, right? So you'll have these goals during that, and you can use these moves. So what I usually do is I've just kind of memorized questions that I think work really well or work for my communication style when I'm talking to kids. And I will use those pretty regularly, and I can remember, okay, if I need a kid to clarify an idea, I'm going to say, can you say that in another way for me, right? Or if I need someone to revoice an idea, I'm going to ask the kids to say, hey, can you explain who can explain that to me in another way? So you have these kind of moves that you memorize. Super helpful for leading a discussion. 5th recommendation I've got for you is have a routine for when students do not feel comfortable. So when you're leading a whole class discussion, you're going to get crickets every once in a while. You'll ask a question and kids will just go silent, right? That might mean they're, for any number of reasons, they're not comfortable sharing an idea. So that might be because they are missing an idea, they don't understand the question, they don't just feel comfortable of taking a chance of sharing those. So one of my favorite routines is I call it the change the format routine. And basically it goes like this. So I ask the question out to a group. No one says anything for a few seconds. Instead of telling them the answer or asking the question another way, I use this routine, which basically goes like this. Okay, it sounds like we could use some time to talk in our small groups. I'm going to give you all 3 minutes to talk in your groups about this. Then I'm going to have each group share out. Give them 3 minutes to talk in their groups. All right, team A, what'd you talk about? Team B, what'd you talk about? Team C. And that gets the conversation moving back again because it lowers the stakes and allows kids to talk in their small groups, and then they can share out ideas from the group, not just theirs individually. And then finally, one of the most important things you can do is establish and continually revisit norms for classroom interactions. Like a lot of these recommendations that I'm sharing with you are really around the idea of conditions or ways to set up productive talks, but doesn't guarantee it's going to happen. It's something you've got to work on and cultivate inside your classroom. And to do that, we need to have certain norms in place so kids feel comfortable and want to talk about the kinds of academic things that you're hoping to get them to talk about. And so we often talk about rules in class: be on time, bring a pencil, be in your seat, raise your hand before asking questions. But for getting discussions, especially in whole groups, you want to start thinking about more talking about norms of things like respectful, inclusive, supportive, and productive. Right. So when we're talking about respectful, we want to make sure the place it's the safe space. So if you voice an idea and take a chance, kids have to be okay with knowing that they could say something wrong or a non-fleshed out idea, and that everybody's going to be respectful when they disagree or want to ask them a question. What does that look like in the classroom? Inclusive means we value everybody's ideas. We encourage people to say things, right? We try to think outside the box. So we support and actively seek that out. Which goes to the next one. Supportive is if we notice someone that's not talking or bringing up, how do we invite them into the conversation? When someone mentions something, how do we make sure that we take up that idea and consider it and talk about it instead of just ignoring it? And then finally, productive. How do we make sure that we stay on track, that we're using our talk to move conversations forward? How do we decide between different ideas? Those kinds of things. So it's really, really important to spend some time not only introducing these norms, but talking with kids about what they mean and what they look like, and then constantly revisit them during the school year, especially if the conversation doesn't go so well, of taking some time to talk over what are these norms, how do we make this happen inside our classroom. So 6 big recommendations. You can kind of think of these as things you do before a lesson that you're going to have whole class discussion going on, and things that you're doing during, right? So the before is you got to know where you need to go. You figure out the type of talk you want to have make happen, and then based on those 2 things, you create a need, all right? Then once that is set up, then you start talking about, once the conversation's going, you're going to start using talk moves to move in productive ways. Make sure you use a routine or have a routine for when talk stops, and then always reminding kids and revisiting norms during and or after these discussions, right? So that's kind of where these 6 recommendations fill in. So let me give you an example of what that might look like in practice, because this is all kind of big ideas, but let me show you what that might look like, right? So I've got this investigation, and I want kids to really start thinking about figuring out a phenomenon, right? So in this investigation, it's called Swimming in the Dead Sea. And my goal as a teacher is I want kids to identify gaps in their own understanding about what's going on related to this phenomenon. So the type of talk I really want them to engage in is not so much telling me answers or explanation or sense making. I want them to problematize. I want them to think about what they don't know. And part of that is being able to explain an overall phenomenon. So that's going to create the need for them to talk about what they do and do not know. So I'm going to show you how this might looks like. So in this investigation, we introduce this idea that there's a Dead Sea that's located at the lowest point on Earth. And we show kids a quick video about this. So I'm going to show you what that video looks like real quick to get you started.
Legend has it that Cleopatra used to bathe in the Dead Sea for its therapeutic qualities. Today, the sea is a fraction of the size it was then, having fallen victim to politics and mineral extraction. It has shrunk by 30 metres in the last 25 years. To highlight the problem, 28 swimmers from all over the world came to swim across from Jordan to Israel. It's the first time it has been attempted and was no ordinary feat.
This swim was indeed life-threatening to the swimmers. Had swimmers swallowed the waters of the Dead Sea without getting that Dead Sea water out of their system, they can die. And that's what's happened here in the past.
They had to wear special masks to prevent the salt intake and were monitored by a medical team. The swimmers included Israelis, Jordanians, a Palestinian, and South Africans.
So that video goes on a little bit longer, but it's introducing this idea of the dangers of swimming in salt water. So We ask kids, write down some things you noticed from that. We listen for them to talk about the dangers of swimming in the Dead Sea. And then you introduce the task, what they need to figure out. That's the phenomenon part of that, right? So in this case, we're asking them to figure out why it's so dangerous to drink water from the Dead Sea, even though you can drink small amounts of ocean water and you're fine, regular ocean water and you're fine. So they have to figure this out. Now, this is where the talk really comes in. So that kind of sets the stage, the need for kids to start talking in small groups. So what we do then is we elicit their initial ideas. So we ask them to take a few minutes to think about what could happen inside your body if you drink salt water. Draw a model of that. What do you think is happening? What's going on? Salt water enters your body. What happens, right? So they start using their initial ideas about what could be going on, and any idea is fine at this point, right? So once they do that, then we encourage them to share their models with the other people in their groups, right? And as they do that, they're going to start clarifying and saying things and identifying things they don't understand and things they don't know. Then you can start getting them to start talking more about what's going on in those small questions, that are identifying some questions in their group that they have. Then those become shared out of the entire class, and these are all things that we want to look at, explore more, and understand, right? So this idea of moving from kind of small group to whole class, to giving kids a need to talk, for giving kids a reason to problematize their thinking so they have more things to talk about, is super important. Just some announcements before we end for the day. We will be talking about promoting and supporting Student Talk Part 2, which will be more in the small group kind of thing. So I'll give you some more recommendations for doing that. And then we'll be doing our last webinar of this quarter, which will be talking about supporting emerging multilingual learners in science. These are all at 4 to 4:30. You can register at argumentdriveninquiry.com webcast. If you can't make it, we'll send you the video right after it's done so you can still participate, because things come up during the day. If you're looking at interested in other webinars we're doing these all the time. We're also doing talks at conferences and things like that. We have an event calendar at our home webpage, which is argumentdriveninquiry.com /programs events. You can see anything that's going on. And if you're also interested in participating in some professional development, maybe face-to-face, you can go to argumentdriveninquiry.com /professional learning. That gives you a spot to see what we offer on those things and what kind of events are coming up as well. Like I said, if you want to get a hold of me and ask about any of these questions, you can contact me at victor@argumentdriveninquiry.com. You can also join in one of our socials, which would be Argument Driven or Argument Driven Inquiry on all of these different ones. There's lots of teachers involved in that. You can ask questions, get tidbits and things like that. So with that, I'm going to close out this webinar. Thanks so much for joining us today, and have a great rest of the week and great weekend.